Hello, and welcome to Magic is Real, a podcast focused on the fascinating world of near-death experiences, spirit communication, and all things metaphysical and spiritual. The mission of this project is to share messages of hope and inspiration with others, and to spread the word that death is only an illusion. Thank you for being here with an open heart and mind. I wish you peace, light, and love always. Hello, Magic is Real listeners. Thank you so much for being here today. Today I have with me Kenneth Leth. I'm going to call him Ken to be more familiar. And Ken is a man. He's a human being who had an extraordinary experience as a child. And today we're going to talk about that spiritually transformative experience. And I'd love to start by welcoming you, Ken. And also, it's so nice to have you here. Thank you for joining me. And I'd really love to start by having you just sort of introduce yourself. When you and I spoke before the recording started, you kind of described yourself as a regular guy with a regular life, and retired, living in Nebraska. But I'd love to hear even though you had your NDE very young, I'd love to hear about what was your childhood like? Who are you as a human being?
Oh gosh, I was a typical little boy. Spent a lot of time outdoors, and I had neighborhood friends, next door neighbors. I had school friends that I spent time with, and see, I was in the third grade when the near death actually took place, and I think my parents were. I think they were steering me a little bit toward something called Cub Scouts. The next step would have been, I forget what they're called, Eagle Scouts, Cub Scouts.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Can you say that again? Because you broke up when you said that. They were gearing you toward, or they were pushing you sort of towards.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, they were sort of pushing me toward the Scouts, the American Scouts. I was a Cub Scout because of my age at 8 years old. I was taking piano lessons. I loved music back then, so I was taking piano lessons. And I had a newspaper route. I had a great fondness of automobiles, cars. So one of my favorite things was to build models of cars and display them in my bedroom. I wasn't real big into sports like football and baseball, those types of things. I was more into kind of role playing and doing things like a cowboy and Indian type thing, or, just a typical boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. We went to church. It was Protestant.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember many times being in front of the church and having to sing, and lots of holidays, lots of good meals, very good people. I was a very fortunate boy.
Did you, I know you went to church. Do you remember having any sort of strong spiritual belief at the time, an understanding of sort of what all of that meant? Or, yeah, I guess, or was it just sort of a tradition for you?
Well, yeah, at that age, I didn't have a real strong concept of who God was. I do remember, though, in when I was really little and I went to Sunday school, we talked about God one day, and the concept that God is there everywhere, that he lives in your heart, he knows what you're doing. The whole idea was, well, where is he? I was always wondering, well, where is he? How do I feel him? How do I know that? And I never did have an indication that he was there that I could tell. So it was all very mystical and mysterious to me. I didn't understand it. But I was a very happy child, and I was perfectly okay with the idea that God existed.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that Jesus had died on the cross because every year around Easter, that was a big deal in the church. So I knew about the story of Jesus dying on the cross. I thought it was a terrible thing that he had to go through.
Yeah. Yeah,
But,
that really hit me hard too as a kid. It's pretty intense for a kid.
it's gruesome.
It's horrible.
And And then the punishment, why was that type of punishment necessary? Since I've gotten older and I have a better understanding of my near death and what I experienced up in heaven, I keep thinking, cruel punishment like that, torture
Mhm.
leading up to death because of a person is supposedly guilty of a crime. I keep thinking, why don't we think more about if there must be a punishment, let it be focused on the crime and maybe perhaps some focus on how to correct it so that crime doesn't happen again.
Yeah.
And looking at the root causes of why a crime takes place, rather than just assuming incarcerating somebody and locking them up. That's it.
Yep. That
Quite
doesn't
quite
help
often,
heal.
no, and quite often I think that system makes people more criminal. They go
Hmm.
to jail to learn how to steal.
Yep.
you know,
I agree with
and
you. Yeah. So now
that's an
what?
old standard.
Yeah, I know. So you're 8 years old. What's happening in your life and what leads to your near-death experience?
Well, just like every little kid, I had this terrible habit of putting things in my mouth, when I was younger.
Yep.
Excuse me.
Yes, please.
As it turns out, I had an appendicitis. My mother told me later, years later, she told me that for about a month before I got really sick with the appendicitis, that I'd come home from school a few times and was not feeling well. She could never figure it out. But then when I finally did get sick, it resembled the flu.
Hmm.
And, they called a local doctor and described everything to him. And he just recommended that I stay home because it sounded like the flu. Turns out it wasn't. And by the time I finally was sent to the hospital, my appendix had already burst. I remember the day when it happened. And actually, I'll share some with you that I haven't shared in a previous video, if you don't mind.
I would
I'll
love
give you
it.
something unique.
Thank
That
you.
would give you something unique. Yeah. Um, the day the day before I was taken to the hospital, my mother she worked, but she stayed home to take care of me while I was sick. But for some reason, her boss called her up uh, the day that I was finally diagnosed. Anyway, her boss called her up and begged her to come to work for about half a day because there was just nobody else to be there at her job. She didn't want to, but she did. She left me alone. And I was doing okay. I was doing a lot of sleeping, never could eat any food. So long story short, I wasn't drinking a lot of water because it caused me to vomit. So she went to work for just half a day. I was alone. I woke up so thirsty. I couldn't stand it. I had to have water and I knew it would make me sick. I somehow got to the kitchen sink from the living room and I got to the kitchen sink and I took a glass of water. And I remember it tasted fantastic.
Mhm.
But before I could put the cup down, I passed out. And I fell backwards in the kitchen and I woke up, or at least I was aware that I was on the floor, and all of my vision, all the color just faded to white. It just completely faded and I felt real fuzzy. And I guess, I don't know, at that moment, I could have died at that moment, I think. I think my consciousness was ready to flee, to
Yeah.
leave my body. So everything turned totally white, and I just laid there thinking, what am I going to do? What should I do anything? And I just decided to lay there and wait, see what happens. Eventually, the color came back to my vision, so I got up. And now I'd been home by this time. I'd been home to close. It was close to a week and a half. So my gut was pretty messed up by that.
Yeah.
I remember crawling back to the couch and laying down, and I couldn't get comfortable, and I sort of turned, and something in my gut went kind of boink, almost like a rubber band snapping, and it kind of itched. But within an hour or so after that, I felt better. I felt so much better.
Oh, wow.
It's because my appendix had burst and all that finally was allowed to get out, you
Yeah.
know. So as it turns out, after the operation was over, the doctor told me that apparently I had swallowed a small chain. Um, in my day, they had something called a rabbit's foot that came in a little beaded
Yes,
chain.
we had those too. Yes.
Okay. Well, apparently I was playing with a beaded chain and I swallowed it. It got down into my appendix and it wrapped around it.
How did you not know you swallowed a chain?
Didn't remember doing it.
You're a kid. Yeah.
Just a kid, yeah. So anyway, so I got really, really sick when my appendix burst, and I was so pale that my mother told me I was just white like paint. And so she took me to the doctor. He took one look at me and sent me directly up to the hospital. And I think it was within an hour or so, I was on the operating table. So I'm a scared little boy. My mother was frantic trying to get a hold of my dad to let him know that I was going to be operated on. So I knew that she was a little bit upset. And then when they put me in that gurney and they pushed me away down this long, dark hall in the hospital, I didn't like being separated from my mom like that. And so I started to cry. I was pretty scared. And then to make it worse, when they got me into the operating room, they tied me down with these really tight straps. So I couldn't move anything. There was just no way I could move. So I was completely confined. And then they put a screen over my mask and they poured ether over it. In those days, it was 1963.
Yeah.
So at least in my little hospital, in my county, they didn't have injections for that kind of stuff. So they used ether. And all I remember is they were asking me to act like I was blowing a balloon. It was like a contest. And in between my cries, my tears, I was trying to breathe. And man, that stuff hit me hard because I felt like my consciousness started to orbit my body like it was a planet or like a moon, the spinning, and it was the nauseous type spinning.
Mm.
And then just all of a sudden, like that, everything went black and I was out of my body. And there was like a type of awareness that came to me. It was almost like I heard a voice, but I can't really describe what the voice was like, but it sounded like an authority figure. It sounded like somebody, an adult. And they were asking me whether I wanted to live or die, that I had to decide.
You're 8 years old. How
And
do
I
you
was eight
know
years
that?
old. And I'm like, well, I want to live.
Yeah.
And then it was like from that point on, then everything kind of went after that decision. Then I started to sort of develop. I almost felt like I was a little amoeba and I kept expanding. My cells would grow and then I would split and then I'd get bigger and bigger. And I became self-aware that I was me, that I could still think, that I knew who I was. It was all there. I wanted to see, I wanted to hear. Those things weren't there right away. But eventually I could see things. And I knew eventually I did look like myself while I was kind of a ghosty, transparent look. Then I started seeing spirits coming up. I knew they're coming off the planet, off the earth. And I know that they all looked mostly to me like older people, like grandparents, with the gray hair. And I knew I knew they were passing away on earth. And then I could see their spirit jump up and then float on beyond me and then go up. And I saw several people leave their bodies like that. And sometimes I could even kind of see into their sick room where they were at. I think even one of them, I think he was a minister of some kind. He might have been Catholic. And then one of them stopped and talked to me and said something like, "You shouldn't stay here. It's not good to be here. It's like you need to keep moving." So he tried to help me and he tried to get me to move. And that's when I realized that I had a tether or a rope or a cord. Some people say a cord. Came out of my belly and went down into the operating room. And then when I looked way down along the cord, I could see my body down there, and the doctor's working on me. But it was really a long distance away, but it was there. So anyway, that cord kept me stationary. I could not move up. And even though that one guy, that one spirit stopped, I couldn't move. So I think he said something really nice, like, I'll go on up then, and then I'll tell them that you're down here. I think he said something like that. Everything was fine for a while, until I started noticing that I wasn't alone in this place. The spirits that were moving up, I wasn't alone because of them, but they had places to go. So, they were there and then they were gone. I started to notice that I was surrounded. I'd started to see little eyes looking at me from a distance, and they were aware of me, and it was like they were alive and they could think. So I started to question what they were, and they knew I was thinking that. As soon as I knew I was aware of them, I started understanding what they were thinking in return. And it wasn't nice. They were angry, evil, hateful, but they came to me, they appeared to be children. So there was a lot of teasing and poking and pushing and laughing about it. And if I would reject them and move away, that just made them happier. They loved it. And they realized that my tether was holding me there, so I couldn't fight back. And they could fly around, I couldn't. And they would hit me, and I would spin on that tether, just spin and spin and spin and spin and spin. So it was real confusing for me. And then they'd laugh, and it was not fun. But the evil behind it, that's the part that really shook me to my core. And I think I've come to realize that what they were, how they exist, there's spirits roaming the earth. Those spirits were afraid of God's light. They were afraid of getting close to the love and the goodness. For some reason, they rejected it. Now, I don't know if it was because they were afraid of being confronted by God and having to pay for their sins, like be told, hey, you weren't such a good person. Is that what they're afraid of? Or are they physically afraid of that light, like it's painful for them? I got the impression that the light burned them a little bit. And one of the reasons they attacked me was because I still glowed a little bit with life. They didn't. They were blacker than black, and they really resented me. So their whole focus, their whole thing was to destroy me. They wanted to put out my light, to tear me to nothingness. So it was really, really bad. Somewhere, somehow inside me, I finally called out for help. And I said, please, God, make them stop. I don't think at the time when I said it, I was really thinking so much about God. It was more like I was just expressing, I'm tired of this. And please, God, make them stop is something I would have heard my mother say, for example. So I just wasn't really thinking about God so much, but I was saying, just God, please stop it. That's the way I felt. But I was heard when I said that. And it wasn't too long. I heard a voice way off in the distance, and it felt like it was high above me. And it was saying, did you call for God? Something like that. And then it was like, I heard you. Where are you? Call out again so I can hear you. I can find you. So I kept calling out. As I was calling out, these entities or these evil spirits that were attacking me, they backed off. As soon as they heard me say God, they were like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. That's the way they acted. And then as this voice came closer, it was a very kind and gentle voice. It was a very concerned man. He was a beautiful man. But as he got closer, he glowed, and they couldn't stand it. They had to leave. So they took off, and I felt so much relief that I wasn't going to be attacked anymore, as long as that guy was there with me, which I believe actually was an angel, because he had a long flowing robe, and he kind of hovered, but he didn't have any wings, but he hovered. So I kind of think when in the early religious days, when painters, for example, would try to picture an angel, I think they put wings on them to indicate that they hovered. I think that's what they're doing.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and then the righteousness or the light, that's represented by the halo. But I've seen people who are very righteous and spiritual, and they glow. I've seen them. I've seen one lady, I saw her just glow blue because she was sitting praying, and God was listening to her. And that was beautiful. So yeah, this angel glowed. And so he talked to me for a while and asked, he had to find out what I was doing there and how all this happened. He figured out that, excuse me, he figured out that my operation wasn't going so well. And so he told me that I'm going to have to cut your tether or cut your rope or cord, whatever. And he had a horn, long, long horn. It was like on a strap and it hung on his shoulder, but he also had a sword. I remember him having a sword. And I think the sword was around his waist, but I'm not real sure. But he took that sword and he cut that cord that was holding me there. And then he says, now I'm going to have to protect you so you don't get attacked again. And he put me in this, it's like a bubble. And he put me in it and says, now you'll be safe. And I'll have to send you on up. I did leave out one part that maybe I should tell you, though, that before he cut the cord, he was talking up high above us. And there was kind of a yellowish light up there. And I think he was speaking Arabic or Hebrew or something. It was another language I didn't understand, or maybe it was Latin. I don't know. But he was speaking up, and I guess he was letting them know that he found me, or he found somebody that he was protecting. So at one point I asked him, who are you talking to? What are you talking about? And he said, all I can remember is kind of like it came to me as a concept. And the concept was there were people up there looking for my family, is basically what he said. We're trying to find out who you're connected to and who is your family up there. And I still didn't realize it was heaven. I didn't, I had no idea. So then he put me in, and then he said, I'll have to send you up now. So immediately after I got away from that dark place and away from those bad spirits, then I realized I was floating above the earth, and I could see the roundness of it, and I could see like streetlights and stuff, and parts of the globe that were dark, I could see streetlights. I've been just steady, just kept going up, and I could see a lot of galaxies, real clear, real thick, and just full of wonderful, beautiful lights. It's really beautiful to see. But eventually there was a formation. It looked like a formation of stars that looked like a spiral, like it was spinning. And then as I got closer, it resembled like a funnel or like a whirlpool, something like that. Excuse me. Well, then I also realized I looked back at the earth at one point, and then I realized that I was in sort of like a channel or like a tube. And there were a lot of people coming up off the earth with me in this tube. And I remember one man that spoke another language, and I believe he was Asian. And I think that's the language I heard. But he was happy. He was excited. It was like everything was happening to him. He was just, oh, this is great. Oh, the way he acted. We got up to the funnel, or the whirlpool, and it took us in. Then it kind of looped, went around and curved. It was almost like going through a ride at a carnival, uh, with lots of colors. And I think actually what that tunnel did was it separated all of us. We all had different places we needed to go. So it was almost used as a sorting machine. Um, I wasn't connected to or related to any of the people that were around me. So I was sent off. My bubble was sent off all on its own. So when I left the tunnel, I just kept floating up. I could feel that I was floating and I kept going up until eventually I hit a barrier and it was like a cloud and my bubble would go no higher. And it was whitish, puffy. It didn't really move or change. It just looked like a very soft barrier, almost like cotton. And I sat there for a minute and I was like, okay, I'm not moving. Where am I going to go now? Two arms reached down through this barrier all of a sudden, grabbed me by the arms, or like my shoulders, and pulled me up and set me down. And I'm standing in front of a man and I have no idea who he is. But I wasn't scared through this whole thing. I was not frightened. It was like when the angel told me I was going to be okay. I really believed him. Like everything was going to be fine. And so this man, he looked to be about the same age as my dad. Um, he was even kind of dressed like my dad a little bit. He kept asking who I was and who was my family. And I couldn't really understand him too well. I didn't seem to know anybody that he knew, I guess. So he finally said, well, maybe we should just go talk to my grandparents. They're up here and I'll introduce you to them. Because apparently he must have somehow understood that I was a member of his family, but he couldn't figure out how. So I took him up to talk to his grandparents. And then I met another set of grandparents. And they were all like, who are you? And they were nice, but they couldn't figure out who I was, which is, you know what, that's really odd because every other person I've observed, a video, a near-death person, they're greeted by people that know them.
Yeah.
That didn't happen for me. Very strange. So there's these grandparents. They kept asking, especially two older women. They kept asking who I was, and I finally said, "My name is Kenneth." Well, what's your whole name? My whole name is Kenneth Peter Leth. I told them. When they heard me say Leth, they're like, "Oh, we know that name." So they go, "Who's your father?" I go, "Oh, my dad's name is Lyle. My dad's name is Lyle." And the two women, they were just like, "He's our grandson."
Oh,
So we're
interesting.
related. They finally made the connection. You know, the crazy thing is I have their pictures, both sets of grandparents. I'm sorry, I don't have them so I can show them to you, but
But they're there.
they're there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my living grandmother on my dad's side when I came back later in my life. I told her about these older couples that I met up there, and I know there's some kind of grandparents. And my grandma told me that, well, I have pictures of them. Do you want to see the pictures? She took me down in the basement. She had them all. They were so old. She wasn't hanging them in the house. She just kept them in the basement, blankets and stuff covering them. And she took all that off and showed them to me. These old black and white photos. I knew who they were.
That's
I knew
cool.
that. I knew that. I knew that one couple were her mom and dad, and then I knew the other couple was my grandfather's mom and dad. And but I didn't know their names, so I've learned that since. Um, so anyway, so these grandmothers, they figured out who I was, and then we had a lot of conversation back and forth about family and what life was like, you know, for them, and it was like they didn't necessarily have to communicate with me in words. Concepts were shared with me. And it was almost like they could just transplant a memory and give it to me. And I could see it and experience it just like they did. That's what it felt like. So I knew what it was like to ride in a buggy, a horse-drawn buggy. Uh, I knew what it was like to raise chickens and work on the farm. You know, in their homes, they had um, big cast iron stoves with stovepipes to heat the house. I knew what it was like to live that way. So I kind of like that time period, the early 1900s that they lived in. And I think that's one of the reasons why I feel so comfortable in this old house, because it just turned
Right.
100 years old in 2020, this house.
Right.
So I probably we're talking a little bit in circles. Getting back to heaven. So yeah, I got to meet a couple of women up there who were my dad's school teachers. They told me he was a very good student. I know that I met several people who would have been my father's friends. And I think a few of them died in World War II because they looked younger. There were a few of them. But for the most part, it was just family that I met up there. And I know I met a lot more people than I can recall. And then eventually, one of my grandmothers told me that a very special person was coming for me and wanted to meet me. And it was a woman. I immediately loved her. I was so comfortable. She had a lot of love in her. And I knew, you know how kids are with somebody that they like, they just know that they're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this woman had so much love in her. It was like I'd known her all my life. And but she wasn't dressed in a way that you see like in churches and stuff or images in the Bible. She had a very rough tunic on. It was like a real loose weave, uh, and it looked rough and itchy. And her hair was all chopped and mangled. It just stuck out bunches here and there. And I must have said something to her about it, because then the image of scissors came to me, and I was saying, yes, scissors. Why did you cut your hair with scissors? Or I said something like that. She told me that, no, my hair looks like this because I cut it with a knife. She said, I didn't have scissors, so when I lived on Earth, I cut it with a knife. And that's why my hair looks this way. But I guess it didn't matter, because she always, when she was out and about, I guess she had a hood over her head. So it didn't matter that her hair looked that way. Anyway, that was a very short part of my introduction to her. Mostly, I didn't care about any of that. I just loved her because she loved me. And she said, you come from a family that has a very long history, and I'd like you to see some more of them. I want to show you something. So I agreed to go with her. We traveled quite a distance, it felt like, but I transformed with her. She started to glow, and then like at one point I was a small infant. She was holding me, like swaddling clothes, and then at another point I was a toddler and I could walk, and she was holding my hand and walking with me. So I wonder if some of those images that I recall at that point, I wonder if that wasn't some of my past life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, I don't really know. And so she stops, and then she goes, she mentioned again that I belonged to a family with a long history. She just sort of waved her hand, and there was an opening like a cave, and it was big. And we could have walked into it if we wanted to, but there were like levels, and it's kind of hard to describe, but each generation of what she told me was, each generation of my family that had lived before me were represented in these different levels. And they went back to the fine point of the very beginning of the tunnel, the very beginning. And at the very beginning of the tunnel, there was a bright yellowish light. And then I saw levels of people back until it came to my generation. So I'm looking into this tunnel and I see it looks like another set of grandparents. And the woman is sitting in a chair and she's just waving and waving and trying to get my attention, smiling. And I believe she would have been my great great grandmother. Uh, and I believe that those people never came over to America. They were from Denmark. Um, so yeah, I got to see them up in heaven, which is really interesting, because if you want to talk about genealogy, wow, I got to meet them in a really cool way.
Yeah, definitely not just on a family tree. It's like going back in a time capsule. That's so interesting.
Yeah. And at the furthest back, I mean, at the very beginning of the tunnel with the bright light, very well recall a very tall, gangly man, but he was very tall and skinny, and he was kind of bent. He had kind of a bent back, walking with a really long stick, walking stick. So it was up above his head. The stick was long. And he was standing there, but he looked like he wore pants of some kind. So I'm assuming, I don't know, he looked like he could have been clothed around maybe the 1500s, maybe the 1600s, something like that. So yeah, it was interesting. And then after that, excuse me, after that, Mother gave me my life review, and I saw myself being born, and it wasn't a good birth. And I found out much later in my life that my mother was overdosed on laughing gas while I was being born. And it caused the birth to be really hard because she had to be revived. And I know now that I died while I was being born,
Right.
because it's hard to explain. But so during my near death, and I'm seeing it, I'm seeing all this, it's like being a documented life. And I'm observing my birth. I'm being shown all this stuff about my birth that I normally would never remember. But no, I saw myself leave my body, and then a spirit came to me and said, "Come with me." And it was a woman or a girl. She protected me. I'm thinking now that it was probably my sister who miscarried. My mother knew that it was a girl, and she felt really really bad about it. And she started talking about this miscarriage on her deathbed. Started telling me all these things about her life, all of her regrets. So she mentioned this girl, and as soon as she mentioned it, all those memories of the spirit coming to me when I was a baby and saying, "Come with me," and we went out, and there were colors, and we flew around, and she watched over me. I think it was my sister that miscarried. So yeah, so there was that, and then I saw things happening to me as a child. My mother came from a very large family of 11 kids, and she was one of the oldest. So I have aunts and uncles that are close to my age. And I remember being a toddler. There was one thing I was shown about my childhood, where my aunts and uncles would play with me and they would take care of me and whatnot. But one day I was a toddler and I was in my mother's arms in the kitchen, and around the table sat her parents and then all of their kids. And I was playing a game with my grandfather, and that was there. Um, yeah, I remember most of it was really good. There was only one point where Mother stopped it. If you don't mind, this woman that came to me that took me to show me the tunnel and everything, I refer to her as Mother because that's who she felt like. So Mother at one point did stop all the review of my life, and she said, "We need to correct something here, or we need to look at this." And it was a day when I lost my temper with my brother, and I whacked him over the head with a baseball bat. Yikes. Um, it was a small bat for a kid, so it wasn't very big, but still, it was like a club. It was wood. So I hurt him. And mother stopped it and said, "We don't do this. We don't hurt people. Never. We do not hurt people. Um, we don't let our anger get to the point that we want to hurt people. We don't do that. That's wrong." And I remember feeling really chastised, like, oh my God, I really messed up, you know? And I promised her I would never hit another person as long as I lived. I remember saying that. And I've pretty much kept that promise. I've never struck another person since. I've been angry. I've wanted to, but I'm just not that kind of person. So yeah, she showed me that, and corrected me, and told me to never do that again. But that was it. Otherwise, my life was beautiful. Everything she showed
You're
me.
8 years old. There's probably not much that, not much, and nothing's
Oh,
malicious at that age.
but you know what? There were times I was real shit. I know I was.
When my sister was like 2 and I was 4, I convinced her to touch a hot iron, and I also threw a chair at her. So now you've made me a little nervous about my life review, because I threw a chair at my sister when I was maybe 8 and she was 6. Maybe I was 7 and she was 5. Definitely lost my temper with her a lot, and definitely threw a chair at her and got in trouble for that. So we'll
Well,
see if it
sure,
comes up
but
in my life review. And now that I'm older, maybe they'll be like, she's got that listed now. We'll forward to the ones that happen later in life.
I believe that is true. That
Yeah.
as long as you become self-aware to the point that you realize that it was wrong,
Yeah.
then everything's much better then. You know, it's not like you just can't get rid of the sin ever, and darn it, you're going to have to be punished. It's not like that.
Right.
So I see, I have to tell you, sometimes I see very religious people who they seem to be, they have such a lack of confidence. They're kind of mousy, and they really worry that God is angry,
Yeah.
that God punishes. And boy, there seems to be a lot of fear in some churches.
Yeah.
And I just don't get that, because that's not the way it was.
No, I
No,
believe God is love, and God shows us these things to help us grow with no judgment.
right. Judgments and harshness with judgments.
Yeah.
It's all concentrated here on earth. This
Yep.
is what we do to each other as human beings. But guilt, shame, and fear are connected to emotions that we have control over. So we can embrace those things and say, well, this is all I know. This is the way life is. Obviously, God feels that way too. No, he doesn't.
Right.
We're making a choice when we embrace guilt, shame, and fear. And when you can become self-aware, after a while, you start to realize that person over there is trying to make me feel guilty. They're trying to manipulate me, and I don't have to take that.
Right.
I can move beyond it. That doesn't have to affect me that way.
Yep.
Boy, people get frustrated when you don't play the game, you know? So, so I guess I'm kind of talking around a little bit in circles. So do you want me to go back up into heaven and tell you what happens with my
Yeah. And I
review?
know one thing that I haven't mentioned that I know is sets your NDE apart from a lot of others is you also received information about the future. But tell it however in whatever order you want to. But I know that there were some sort of some prophecies, we can call them, that you were made aware of.
Yeah, we didn't talk much about what we were going to do, and we did the session. So some people really get turned off by that future stuff, and they don't like to talk about it. But if you're open, I will.
I say talk about what's true to you. I want to know what what your truth is and what you truly experienced. And so yeah.
Okay. Well, we, there wasn't really much more going on with my experience with Mother, and kind of, it was like she sort of gave me a tour of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So beyond the life review, I did meet Jesus. And there was a point where um, I think I asked her who he was, because he just sort of showed up. And she said, well, that's my son. On earth, you might have heard him called Jesus. I'm pretty sure she said that. So I was like, oh, okay, great. He didn't glow.
Mm-hmm.
His voice didn't rumble. He was just a nice guy, and he wanted me to be comfortable. And he kind of clowned around with me, and it was fun. That's the way it felt. But then he did take me away from Mother, and she told me it would be okay to do it, to get away. And he says, I do have to be alone with you for a bit. And but he was real fun about it, and he was kind of like, okay, now watch this. Then all of a sudden he glowed, and there was no longer the image of Jesus in front of me or a man. There was this just brilliant light, and it had a voice, and it was speaking to me. And one of the first things he said to me was, I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end of all things. Now, after my near death, I didn't hear those words again until I think I was a teenager, and I was in church, and I heard it repeated in a sermon. And I heard those words. I just sat up. I was like, oh my God, I remember hearing that up in heaven. I was told that. that was a big aha moment for me. So yeah, he told me that he was Alpha Omega. But then he went beyond that, and somehow I know that Jesus was there, but he introduced me to God. And so it was like the three of us were there, but God really was in the forefront. I mean, I knew this was God. And I think he told me he was going to send me back to the earth. He warned me that I should never, ever forget that he's my father. And he told me that there will be times and there will be places where people will try to convince you to give up your faith in me. And he said, never do that. Always know that I'm there for you, that I'm your father. So after all that, then Mother took me again. And she showed me other things. At one point, she took me to a place where I was like walking through. It was almost like they were on a football field, and there were bleachers on either side, and they went up very high, several levels, and they're filled with singers, and they were singing beautiful classical music. Oh, it's some of the best music I've ever heard. One time in a dream, I recalled, I brought that back and I remembered it. And I remember listening to the notes and somehow knowing what the next note should be. And then the music would change, and then I had control of it. And I was playing music up there. That was really a neat dream. I really enjoyed that. But I was shown that when I was up there. At another point, I was shown a Bible. It was described as the Bible. And pages were flipping, and I heard a voice telling me what were in the verses as the pages flipped. And I do remember being told that there were some problems with the Bible, that it had been altered, or it wasn't recorded correctly, or there were places in it where the concept was totally misunderstood. And so knowing that and being told that pretty much tells me that it kind of confirms my inner feeling that a lot of religions I'm not real comfortable with, because all they have is the Bible and their interpretation of the Bible. And I'm sorry, but there's some problems there, you know? So there was that part. Then eventually, Mother took me to a place. It was like a room, and I knew the room was really big. I could just, sense it. And she took me up to this, it was like a machine, but it wasn't clunky and didn't make a lot of noise. It was like a video or I'm trying to think of a particular word, hologram,
Hmm.
where something looks 3D. Is that a
Yeah.
hologram?
Yeah.
Okay. It's almost like a hologram. But it was the earth and it was big. And it was up on a pedestal. And it was like there were controls around at the top of the base, the pedestal. And then there were entities standing around it. And there was one was in control, and then there were two littler ones, and they were taking orders, and they were maintaining this globe. They were pushing buttons and stuff. Weird, weird, weird stuff. But that's what I remember.
Yeah.
Um, and what I was told is that this thing acted as a time capsule. So it was related to time, and that's why it was there. So I pretty much understood that I could see events happening in the past, or I could see events in the future. They did show me a little bit of the past, and I wasn't too interested. For some reason, they took me to an old city with uh, carts, animals pulling carts, a lot of mud and dust, straw. It was really an old city. I wasn't too interested. I didn't understand why they were showing it to me. But then I got this idea that, well, if this is related to time, and I was certainly part of that world, I must occupy a place in that time. So can you show me where I'm at? Where do I fit in? I wanted to know. And an entity that I called a teacher, because that's the way she treated me as a teacher, she said, sure, we can do that. And she just pointed down into central Nebraska, where I was born. And she pointed to that area and said, there, this is your time right here. This is where you belong. And as soon as she said that, a vision opened up, and I could see events going on Earth in the time frame that I was from. And the very first thing that I recall seeing was President Kennedy being shot.
Did you
And
know
he
who he
was
was at that
shot.
time? Were you very aware of who he was at that time? I know he was very famous, but you knew exactly who it
Yeah.
was? Yeah.
Yeah, I knew he was our president. In his school by then, we talked about some of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I also remember, though, that my parents were very fond of him,
Yeah.
especially my mother. She read a lot of books. She loved to listen to him speak because he was very eloquent. And just the way he described things, he was a very good messenger, very clear. So anyway, yeah, I knew who President Kennedy was, but the vision that I saw, I was there in Dallas. I saw the motorcade, and I knew it was driving through a city and people were waving at him. I knew it was the president. They didn't actually show me the gunshots and the bad stuff. But suddenly the cars sped up and drove off. Everybody was real upset. And I knew that President Kennedy had been hurt. And I really, with my little 8-year-old concept of life, I couldn't understand, if God knew this was going to happen in the future, why isn't he stopping it?
Yeah.
I don't remember the exact thing I was told in response, but it was more like people have free will. Sometimes we make the wrong choices. Bad things happen. And there were certain things that just could not interfere.
Hmm.
So that gave me the strong impression that all the rest of the future, my timeline, because they showed me up until I was an old man, that pretty much gave me the idea that our future really is predetermined, but mankind does have the ability to change it and prevent bad things from happening if we just have the right focus. So anyway, so I was after the Kennedy thing, I was shown I saw some wars that we were involved in. I saw some things moving pretty fast. I did see some demonstrating in the streets from the 60s. I saw some of that. But then they sped it up and they took me all the way up. I believe the year was 2015 because they showed me the Supreme Court building. And it has a unique facade with the pillars and it's elevated. And I saw that building and they told me that a ruling would take place there that was significant and that it would cause some disruption because they didn't tell me whether or not the ruling was just or good. They just told me that men, mostly men on earth, would be upset with that ruling and they would cause disruption in our country because of it. They were so unhappy with that ruling. And I believe I'm sticking to it. I believe in 2015, the ruling that I recalled actually happening in this time frame that I'm in now was the gay marriage thing. It went through and it's now legal.
Right.
And I believe the people that were really, really upset about it, well, you can just tell by some of the things that are happening politically right now around gays. There's a real fight and a real push to make them to take away their rights, I believe.
Yeah.
And so I believe it was mostly the fundamentalist church thinking that was so against it. And then after that, we saw some dark money involved, I believe, in choosing some of our replacement Supreme Court justices. I think there was some funny money going on there, some influence. And I wouldn't be surprised if there weren't some evangelist churches involved in that. So anyway, I was told that that ruling would cause some anger and it would cause people to sort of rise up and cause trouble in our country. And that was the beginning of it. And then from there, my vision jumped. And I saw Hillary Clinton, and I'm positive it was Hillary. She was campaigning. And I saw a man with her, and I was told that this other person was also like a president. So I believe it was Bill. He was there. And I heard her campaign a little bit. She was not portrayed to me as somebody that was going to be a problem at all. I got the impression that she would have been a good leader because I remember listening to some of the things that she said. Excuse me. There's a lot of dust in Nebraska right now because it's so dry. Every so often, it gets me almost like asthma.
Oh, there's a lot of pollen here in Virginia. It's coating everything.
Right. So
it's literally a sheet of pollen on everything.
I would not be able to tolerate that.
Yeah, it's rough.
Let's see, where was it? Oh, yeah, Hillary.
Yeah.
So I believe I listened to some of the things that she said, and I remember asking, well, she seems all right. And I was told that she may not win. She may not be the president because there was something about some laws. But I remember I was told that she may not win the election. So you see, there might have been a chance she could have. I don't know. But maybe the path that some of us took was wrong and we didn't get there.
Right. Free will.
Yeah, free will again. So then after that, I eventually was shown a president, a leader of our country that was really bad news, causing a lot of disruption. Always angry, accusing people of things, just being a nasty person, very disruptive, causing a lot of unhappiness.
Who could that be?
Yeah. And I remember asking, how could this horrible person become our president? How did this happen? Well, they showed me, just to be blunt, they showed me that evangelist churches in America, in the southeast of America, that they would be pretty much involved and greatly responsible for his election, that they supported. And I knew that the way it was put to me, I knew that to be a terrible sin. I was like, why would a church do that? Why would a church, in the name of God, tell somebody who to vote for in an election? God has no interest in that. That's our stuff.
Yeah.
That's our free will. So to do it in his name, horrible. But they showed me the history of mankind. It was very fast, but it was like they showed me the Bible again, pages flipping fast. And I saw like arrows and bar graphs and stuff coming down. It was weird. But as the pages would turn, then the bar graph would adjust and move over here, and then it come down. I guess it represented different branches of families. And they showed me the religious path that humanity would take. They took me to old Europe, and they showed me churches developing there. And then those people eventually came over to America, and they brought all their traditions with them. Then once they got to America, they established churches. And then eventually they showed me in the Southeastern America, big churches, complexes, schools, very involved in everybody's life, very active people. And they showed me those churches getting involved in politics. And lavish homes, lots of money involved. These people are living in. I mean, the leaders of the churches. And I knew those churches to be very evil just by the way they were portrayed to me. So yeah, I've pretty much always known that they need to be avoided. Absolutely. And I tell people, if they're preaching politics from the pulpit, maybe you shouldn't go there. Maybe that's not a good place. Maybe you can find another church. I know there's good churches out there that don't do that.
Yeah.
And maybe a person really ought to try to separate the church and the politics. So yeah, they showed me that they would be pretty much responsible for getting that awful man elected. I saw an increase in storms, and I saw damage all up and down the East Coast. I saw a lot of activity and a lot of bad stuff going on down in Florida. And I thought it was because of hurricanes. But I was showing when people die on Earth, there's a sparkle of light before their spirit leaves and goes on its journey. At the moment of death, there's a sparkle of light. I saw sparkling all up and down the East Coast. I thought it was because of hurricanes. And I'm starting to wonder if maybe it wasn't because of COVID. And I saw a tremendous amount of sparkling going on down in Florida. And I was pretty much told it's worse down there. So yeah, that was going on. And then eventually they got back to this evil leader, this president that nobody liked. They showed him walking around his desk and being very uncomfortable and nervous, like he's anticipating something. There's trouble brewing and he doesn't know what to do about it. And he keeps going around his desk, and he go out in the hallway, and then he come back. An advisor would talk to him, and they wouldn't be able to tell him anything that satisfied him. But eventually some official looking men came, like in suits. And also had an understanding that there were some hearings or something going on. There were people discussing him in our government. And I do remember seeing like a large chamber with a lot of like senators discussing the president. Well, these three official looking men, and they wore suits, and they came to him and told him that he will no longer be the president. And then it looked to me like they walked him out onto the lawn of the White House. It took him out. And I don't know if it was a literal thing. Some people take that literal. I take it more as a representation of his being removed as the president. But then the next step, I saw him at a rally It was in Washington, D.C., or a very large city anyway. And he was getting people riled up. And he was telling them to fight, fight, fight. And they got real excited. And then they went out, and it was like a riot. And there was a lot of destruction, people getting hurt. So I believe what I was shown was the insurrection. So yeah, that happened. And then, so something that's supposed to happen not too long after that now is I saw Donald get sick and pass away, or
That's interesting.
something
Yeah.
happens to him, because I saw him just sort of get pulled out of the limelight, and then it was kind of like through a tunnel, and it was spinning, and he just got pulled through it. The next thing I saw, I saw him laying on a hospital bed, surrounded by people. Looked like maybe some family. I wouldn't be surprised if that one person I saw was a woman and it was Melania. I wouldn't doubt it one bit. But that was the last I saw of him. That was it. No more of him. The next thing that happened after that, though, was then the riots started up in the streets again. And there was, I call them dark shadow people. Dark shadow people, people with empty hearts, who are angry, who all they want to do is to be destructive. They want to cause people to tear down their country. So they're inciting people to riot. And I saw them doing this, and over the years that I've been talking about this part of my memory, I just tell people, if you know somebody that's got a dark heart, that's a black shadow person, they would be somebody who's wanting you to be violent, who's telling you that you must fight, that there's something going on in the country that it all has to be torn down. Those are black shadow people. And often they're paid to do that. I know that too. So I tell people to stay away from them. But I saw additional riots, and then eventually I saw what looked like a building that was like a tower. And I saw people rioting around it, and I saw black shadow people inciting the violence going around this tower. And then they eventually get inside, and they go up, and then there's an explosion. And then I'm shown where the damage is, and it looked like a TV studio with cables and stuff hanging down from the ceiling with the damage. And a long counter that would have been like the studio where the people sit behind it in their chairs or whatever as they report the news. That's what I remember. And I asked, how come these people are rioting, and how come they did this? Why the destruction? Because I didn't like it. And I was told that they're rioting because they believe lies. They've been told lies and they believe them. And they're angry because, well, they don't know the truth. So they're fighting. So again, black shadow people, misinformation is out there, and it's been used on purpose. So yeah, and then from there, I remember there was it was like there was some sort of hearing, investigation into who knew this was going to happen and why did it happen. Now, mind you, this is going to happen in the future, I believe. So Donald hasn't gotten sick yet. And then after that, there's an explosion. It looks like a TV studio. And so there's an investigation. And I saw two youngish looking men, like late 20s, 30s maybe. I remember one having darker hair and one having lighter hair. Now it could be Donald Jr. and Eric, but I didn't see their facial features. But they were being asked or investigated, or these two men anyway, were being asked, what did they know, and why did this take place, and why wasn't it stopped? And it had to do with that explosion. And I remember the dark-haired one having a real flippant attitude, like, what do you expect? We see all these other things going on out here that are wrong. Of course they're going to riot. Of course they're going to be explosions. How could they not? That was his attitude. And I also remember kind of a hideous laugh. Like, I don't know, people are quirky and they have their ways, but this guy had a laugh that was like, it sounded devious, you know, this is the way it sounded to me. I didn't like him one bit. And then after that, I started seeing more disruption in the country. I do remember seeing like some raids were going on in some homes, and homes are being invaded and people are being drug out and arrested. I remember seeing that. And I remember kind of like feeling the disruption that all this was causing in people's lives. That was going on. Then eventually I saw an army building in the West, like as far away as California, and then it started moving toward the East. And then I saw horrible, terrible destruction. And I don't know if it came from the war and with guns and fighting, or if there wasn't some kind of horrible natural disaster like a terrible earthquake. But it was like I could see sparks flying and explosions and shaking and total chaos. And there were times, you know, I still associated with the knowledge that I was an 8-year-old boy. My concept of myself was I was still 8 years old. There were times when some of the destruction was so horrible, I could watch it. I just turned away. I knew it was going on, but it was too much. It was like overload.
Why do you think you were shown all of this? Do you know?
That's a very good question. I'm still trying to find the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of me thinks they showed me all this because I asked to see my future, and here it is.
Right.
It wasn't like they gave me a job to do to share it. I do not remember at all being told, now go out and tell people about this. I don't
Yeah.
remember being told that. If anything, at one point, Mother came back to me and she was concerned about everything that I had seen that was so destructive. And she erased some of it out of my head, because I remember her saying, if you go back to Earth with all of this knowledge in your head, you will become a prophet. And if you're a child prophet, your life is going to be very difficult. And she said, I don't want that for you. I don't want you to struggle. So she erased a lot of that really bad stuff about the future, just wiped it out. And, you know, it didn't come back to me until I was about 22 years old. It came to me. And it came through a spiritual transformative occurrence where God spoke to me in a dream, called my name. And after that dream, all those memories that had been hidden for so long, they came back to me. You know, when I was a kid, I always knew something big was going to happen. Like there's going to be this terrible war. I remember that, always believing this terrible war was coming, but I couldn't remember the details. It didn't come to me until I was about 22. So right when they came back to me, I wrote them down, but that earliest version, it was really rough. Because over the years, as I continue talking about it, more and more detail has come to me. So it's in my book. So, you know, it's pretty detailed.
Yeah. And can you say the name of your book is A Child Goes to Heaven? Is that right?
Child Goes to Heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And my publisher is called mishaelbooks.com. It's Mishael, Mishael. Gosh, I'm so sorry. I hope I spelled that right.
It's
Anyway,
okay. I'll put a link. Yeah.
There you go. Because if you look for the book, you'll find a link.
Yeah.
Maybe I have to cut this part out. So, Yeah. After I saw the war and everything starting, I saw the fighting continued pushing toward the east. And then there's a major event, and it looked like it was down in, and it's because of the fighting. And it looked like it was down in Arkansas, perhaps Louisiana. I don't think it was as far as Alabama. I think right in those Louisiana, Arkansas, kind of around in there. I saw what looked like an official building, like it could have been a government building. And I saw fighting there, and everybody inside, I think, is killed. But what that does is the building is destroyed. It releases something that looked to me at the time, looked like a demon. It was like this black blob, and it was just concentrated evil like a spirit. And it rose up out of that building because it was destroyed. It was happy and it was laughing this really evil laugh, and it was leaving because it had accomplished everything that it wanted to do. It was there to cause disruption and anger and frustration, and it had what it wanted, and it was done, and it moved on. But after that spirit thing went away, people stopped fighting and they stopped arguing. And people were like, why are we fighting? Why are we doing this? And suddenly there's an awareness, and everybody realizes they were thinking the wrong things, and it was causing them to fight, and it was wrong. We shouldn't be fighting. So it's like an uplifting is what it felt like. So there were a lot of remorse, a lot of people shaking their heads. It's like, why did we do this? And we did it to ourselves. And it's just horrible. But then after that, excuse me, after that, it was like there was a major realization that the country needs to change. There were problems within our government that needed to be corrected, and that was being done. But it was like a refreshing new thing, and it was exciting, and it was going to work. That's what it felt like. But then I believe what I sensed was there was trouble brewing again, and there were other countries involved. It wasn't just the United States. And that's when I saw a major explosion, like a hydrogen bomb, but a big one. And I saw a mushroom cloud. And I saw it take place. It looked like around between Wyoming and Montana, kind of around where Yellowstone is. Huge mushroom cloud, huge explosion. And then a ring of white, just like when you cause a ripple in water, when you drop like a pebble into the water, you see the rings moving out. Well, that's what this white was. It was a ring that stayed on the ground, but it was destructive. It was like a wave of energy. And when it hit things, it killed it, knocked it down. So it was like it looked to me like a cleansing. It wiped out most life on our continent. I'm sure it went up into Canada, but what I saw it was spreading across America to the east. And then after a while, it got real quiet. All the noise of all the people and the struggles and the disruptions that humans put up with every day, they were silent. It was peaceful, quiet, and beautiful. Trees started to grow again, beautiful trees, tall trees. Life eventually returns. Only now humanity is different. We're not focused on material things. We're living more like we're in a tribe. It's an awful lot like Native Americans, is what they look like to me. I saw people living on our continent again. And I also understood that it was a very long ways away. It would take a long time before those people are there. But living very simple lives, very happy lives. They appeared to be very spiritual, very connected to each other. and living very peaceful and very happy. Um, and then the entity that I called a teacher that was showing me all this stuff, because she had control over all these visions. She said, so you see, Ken, it's going to take a long time and humanity has to go through a lot of bad stuff. But eventually you're going to get to a very beautiful time and it's going to be wonderful. So it was kind of like, take heart and keep your faith and believe, because things can get better. That's what it was like. And then, yeah, I do remember at one point, they showed me even time, even going beyond that. And I saw the sun get bigger and bigger and bigger and hotter and brighter. And then that was the end. So I believe that's when the earth is no more. But
Yeah.
boy, they say that's going to be out many, many years.
I would assume it would be millions and millions of years, but it does sort of
Uh,
check out with what seems to be happening in terms of so much feels so hopeless and so violent and so terrible. But I also believe that there's so much light coming from that darkness and that so many people are becoming awake spiritually and that more and more people are starting to become not that there's any judgment for people who aren't spiritual, but it feels like there are more and more of us that are starting to understand our true nature and starting to understand that this isn't all there is. Just the fact that I do this podcast and receive very little flack from people about it, that people are more interested than they are cynical in general, I would say. It
sure.
doesn't mean there
Yeah.
aren't millions of people who still are cynics, but it definitely feels like more of us are coming together with that hope, even though there's terrible things. There are terrible things happening now.
Yeah, in the early 2000s, I was desperate. I wanted to meet another person who had been through near death because I didn't know anybody. I was the
Yeah,
only one. So in the early 2000s, with the advent of the internet, looking for other people. And there for a number of years, I found nothing. I found books that some people had written. But I don't know about you, but I'm interested. I would rather listen to them tell it themselves, like in a video, than to read their book.
oh yeah, me too.
I get so much more out of viewing them. But that wasn't available back then.
Yeah,
I found nothing. I found very little support. And then eventually, right around 2013, 2014, and that's when we moved to this house. That's when I discovered NDERF. Uh, Boy, you know what? I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's research studies. Anyway, NDERF. And then I found ions too.
hmm
And then I discovered a radio show hosted by Lee Whitting. And I was listening to his podcast, his radio show on my
is it Near Death Radio? Is that the name of Lee's?
near death
Yeah, I think
radio
it's called
with
Near
Lee
Death Radio.
Whitting. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a former minister, I guess.
hmm
So he's pretty knowledgeable. But just on a lark one day, I was just kind of cruising the internet and I found this radio show and I thought, well, this is interesting. They talk about near death. This could be fun. I listened to it. And that day he didn't really have any material. He was asking for people to call in with their stories.
Oh wow.
I go, well, I'm one of those people. So I called him. And boy, it didn't take but just a minute of my telling my story that he was like, I got to talk to you again. There's more here. And so then I
Yeah.
had like 2 interviews after that. So part of it was just the point where mother scolded me and just took me to meet my family in the tunnel and everything. And then the second part was to talk about the future.
Yeah.
So
And now there's no dearth of people willing to talk about it. I think there's so many people that still don't. So there's still even more people that this has happened to that just don't talk about it because of their religion or their culture, or maybe just
right,
being
right, right.
shy and scared of judgment in general. But it does feel like more and more people are speaking out about this. So, and that's why I do this podcast too. I think it does give hope in a time that's very dark. COVID and the whole Trump presidency and the war that's happening right now, there's so many things that people are so afraid of, and there's so much fear that I really like to provide a bit of light and a bit of hope
Yeah.
in all of that. And also just in general, so many people are afraid of death. It's the
So
unknown.
afraid. And you
Yeah.
don't have to be.
No,
It's
and we
just like
live,
stepping into another room.
I love that. You froze a little bit, but you said it's just like stepping into another room.
Right. Yeah.
And I think people need to hear that because so much of our lives are dominated by fear. And even the way we go through the world, a lot of people are,
Right.
I was until later in life, just in a constant state of fight or flight, fear, anxiety, and stress. And it's killing us. I mean, it's really causing health
Yeah.
problems and mental health problems and so many things, when it was really only after I started to learn about this stuff that I would say I'm
Mhm.
75% anxiety free now after a whole entire life of living
Oh,
in
wow.
severe anxiety to the point where it was taking a toll on my health, and seeing a psychologist at age 2 from the overwhelming anxiety and just constantly being in a state of fear, and just the choices that I made and the fear-based decisions. And I think it is so important, and so I thank you for being here and sharing your story. um only due to time am I not asking more about sort of how you lived your life, but I do want to hear if you can sort of summarize, after having had an experience like this and so young, the rest of your
Yeah.
life must have been
Yeah.
informed by this experience. And I'd love, and there's no real time limit. I just want to kind of keep it as brief as
Right.
possible. But
All right.
feel free to share that. And
Well, there is one thing we did touch on it a little bit, and that
yeah.
is the fear of dying.
Hmm.
I wish churches would better prepare people
Yeah.
for death. Um, I think it's treated like the big unknown, and we don't trust. They really religious people, the hierarchy of churches, they're connected. They're very smart people. They're very well educated. They've been told about some of the stuff that people like me go through. They know it. They've heard it. Why is there the general assessment then that none of that can be trusted?
Right.
And I think it's because it's not described perhaps in a way that they can understand in the Bible.
Hmm.
I believe Jesus must have had a near death before he got active, before he gathered his people. And I can read things in the Bible that speak to me of a possible near death. Jacob's ladder, for
Hmm.
example, wrestling with the angels. Um, I I think I think perhaps in the past those things were described as best they could,
Yeah.
but sometimes they were interpreted by people who didn't really know what it was. So yeah, taking the Bible too literal is probably a real problem these days, and I just wish people could know, somehow could just know that God's love is there. It's there for all of us. It's actually sustaining everything living around us always. That life wouldn't even be possible without that. So give the man, give God some credit. Just because you don't see him, you don't think you can feel him or whatever, doesn't mean he doesn't exist.
Yeah.
We're all extensions of God, every one of us. And then one other thing I'll tell you about churches in general is I really don't feel comfortable with churches that tell people that you'll never get to heaven unless you repent. That you were born into sin and now you're like defective from birth. And if you don't get with it and don't get religious and go to church, you'll never get to heaven. That's a terrible thing to tell people.
Yeah.
I wasn't indoctrinated when I was 8 years old. I got up to heaven just fine. And there was
Right.
not a thing said to me about religion other than what I saw in the future. It wasn't important. So churches don't own the keys to heaven, and they sure shouldn't be acting that way. If you don't come through us, you get no key.
Right.
Oh, come on. That's
Yeah,
just not right. And I think perhaps some of that is what's generating some of the fear of death.
I agree.
You know, I also believe uh, that fear probably contributed or possibly influenced my being attacked when I initially left my body.
I meant to ask you about that. Yeah, that makes so much sense.
I was a little boy. I saw what looked like lights or eyes in the distance looking at me. They were hiding. I got suspicious. There were more of them then. I became aware of them.
Hmm.
I embraced fear because
Yeah.
I was unsure of myself and I didn't know where I was. When they sensed my fear, they got aggressive. So, the other piece of advice I like to give people is you never know. Something could happen tomorrow and you don't see it coming, but a person can suddenly get sick or pass away from something like an accident. If you find yourself in that situation and you're surrounded by confusion, always remember you have the option of going to look for God. Say God out loud. Say it. Go looking for it. Go looking for love. Go looking for the light. It will make sense to you once you're out of your body. It will eventually make sense. And once you go looking for God, you're on the safe path and you're going to be fine. And there's nothing to fear. Embracing fear and assuming that death is an extension of all that stuff that you've been experiencing on earth, all the struggles and the fighting and the deception and the distractions and anger, all that stuff. It's gone the minute you leave your body unless you entertain it.
And yeah, that's the key, unless you entertain it.
Unless you entertain it. You don't have to drag it with you. And lighten your luggage. Don't put chains around your ankles, and go looking for light, go looking for love, go looking for God. But focus on the love because every one of us, we do love ourselves to some extent. When you recognize that you're there and you're out of your body and you know who you are now your purest essence of yourself. All the garbage has been dropped away. You don't have a body. You're pure spirit. Recognize yourself and love yourself. And then you go looking for more love. You want to share it. That's the best afterlife. And I think most people still do that for the most part. Although I'm pretty sure there's people who die suddenly in confusion. They often are the people who get stuck on earth because they don't know what to do. Should I tell you that I've had some conversations with some spirits
Yes,
here
please.
on earth?
I was actually going to ask you that. If since your experience you have had heightened intuitive abilities.
And it's not like something that I can just turn on and off.
Right.
So it's possible that there's spirits wandering around me right now, but I can't purposely turn it on and see them.
Right.
Something else has to go on.
Yeah.
Or maybe they have to be looking for something to make me aware of them or something.
Yeah.
But a couple of incidents. Well, you mentioned this place where I'm living it's really old, and across the street is a church that was built in 1906. It's like a museum. It's a wood structure. It's classic, but it's been maintained. I mean, some of the original carpet is still in it. Really tiny pews. They're funny, but really interesting stuff. Well, because it's been kept as a museum, I've always been a history buff. My daughter and I came here one time before I bought this house. But we came to look at the church because we knew it was here. We went into the church, and right away, my daughter was telling me that she felt off, or like something wasn't right. She just couldn't shake it. But she was okay. And she told me she was okay, but she was like, I keep getting these feelings like she didn't know what it was. So eventually we decided, well, let's go. This church actually was not too far away. My parents lived in like the next town, and we were back for a visit. So we got in the car and we drove back to my parents' house. And my daughter mentioned again on the way home, she's like, I can't shake it. There's something weird going on. I just don't know how to describe it. And I go, well, you'll be okay. Maybe you're just tired. We'll go home. So we get back to my parents' house, and eventually my daughter says, I can't shake it. I think I'm just going to go lay down, try to take a nap. Maybe I'll feel better, because she didn't feel right. Okay. So I'm sitting in my dad's lounge chair, and to get to her bedroom, she had to walk past me. As soon as she got past me, I saw a spirit. It was following her, and it was
Wow.
a young man. It was a young man. He looked like he was probably in his late teens. He had blonde hair, which a lot of Danes did.
Yeah.
And I believe he died here in this little town I'm at, and he was probably buried in that church. He was lost. He didn't know where he was. But he was interested in my daughter for some reason. He really latched onto her. He was trying to get her attention. She's very gifted, by the way. She's a very sweet person. So he came walking past me as she went by first, and then the spirit was following her, and then he suddenly realized that I could see him. He stopped. He just stood there and he looked at me, and then he just poof disappeared. The crazy thing is, often when I can actually see the ghost, when they realize I can see them, for some reason they just disappear. They just go away.
That's
But
interesting.
but when he did, I smelled mothballs.
Mm.
And he must have been buried in the early 1900s, and he's been lost all this time. And I believe he was just hanging out in the church across the street. He saw my daughter and he followed her.
Did it
But
frighten you
yeah,
to
he
see him, or did
disappeared.
it feel sort of normal?
I wasn't frightened at all.
Yeah.
When I was little, spirits, I had some encounters and they scared me. But now that I'm older, I don't have any
You
fear
just,
for any of
yeah.
them.
And do
Yeah.
they appear transparent to you?
Yeah. They
Yeah.
look kind of ghostly,
Yeah.
kind of like you can see through them.
Yeah.
It's almost like a hologram in a way.
Yeah.
Um, they're not necessarily 3D, but you just know what they look like.
Hmm.
It just comes to me.
Yeah. Do they speak? Do you get messages from them as well?
Now
Ever? I
that,
know you didn't in this case, but have you?
yeah, not in this case, no. But there was another time that we went to up in the mountains in Colorado, and we stayed at a motel. It was old, so the older original motel rooms were like tiny, and there's a lot of them. And then there was a house that was a part of this motel, I believe, and I believe it was the house that the owner of the motel lived in. I believe. I could be wrong, but that's the way it felt. Anyway, we went up in the mountains. Jennifer was with me, my daughter, my wife was with me, and we decided to rent this house instead of a small motel room. And we had it for several days, so we needed the room. Anyway, we rented this place. I'm looking through the book that people, write stuff about their experience there. I started seeing entries about, we think there's a ghost.
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, this ought to be interesting. Okay, this ought to be fun. Sure enough, the first night I slept in what must have been the parents' bedroom. And it's the bedroom that had a window looking out onto the street. And it was small, and it was only big enough for me. I'm a big guy. So my wife and my daughter slept in another bedroom at the other end of the house. It had the room was big enough that it had a couple of small beds. And so they slept together in that room. Jennifer had brought along a lot of her stuffed animals. She had them lined up. It was either on her bed or along a shelf. I can't remember, one of the two places. But we would leave for a while and come back, and the animals had been moved. She noticed that right away. Those stuffed animals had been moved. And I remember thinking, I wonder if the owner of this place came in and looked it over. But we weren't concerned. Then that first night, I slept in what would have been the parents' bedroom, the people that originally owned the house. I kept hearing this woman tell me, this is the room that mom and dad slept in. This is mom and dad's bedroom.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, fine. And it was like, she just wanted me to know that for some reason. Well, that was the ghost that was in
Yeah.
that house. And then eventually somebody had installed, well, the new owner of the house, which had it for rent because it was part of the motel. He eventually built another bathroom upstairs because there was only the one in the downstairs before. So I decided, well, I'm going to take a shower. And I get out of the shower. I look out the door and I'm wrapped in a towel. And there's an old woman standing there, just as plain as day, wearing an old frumpy house coat, something soft with long arms, and it flowed to the floor. And she's standing there and she's clutching it and she's looking at me like she's not sure what's going on here. She wanted to know what I'm doing there, but I couldn't communicate with her yet. It wasn't coming through. And then she saw me and then she disappeared. And then later, like the day we left, finally I connected with her. And Jennifer and my wife, they went across the street to a park to just go spend some time outdoors. I was alone. And before we left, we were told we better wash the dishes. I was down in the kitchen, working. And I accidentally dropped the pan off the counter and it went loud bang and it landed on the floor. As soon as it made that noise, bang, footsteps thumping across the ceiling. So it would have been the floor above me. Thump,
Yeah.
thump, 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 like somebody was coming to investigate. And then I'm downstairs and I'm like, well, okay, is it coming? Is it here? So I started talking to it and I'm like, are you here? Can you see me? And it was a woman, but I couldn't see it this time. I do vaguely remember kind of like a light, but that's really all I can recall. I don't remember the image anymore. But I heard the words, heard a voice, and it was they said, we see, or I see you. And it said, you're very beautiful. I said, am I now? Well,
Why,
thank
thank
you.
you.
Yes. Yeah. I was like, well, that's nice. And I said, well, you're very beautiful too, because I did notice there was like a light involved here. And it was I didn't see a body image, but I did see like a light. And I was trying to tell it that, you don't have to stay here in this house. You can leave if you want to. It seemed really confused, like it didn't know what to do. It wasn't, it didn't appear to be scared. It didn't appear to be worried. It seemed to be pretty happy. But the idea of leaving and like going on to the light or looking for God, it didn't want to do it. For some reason, it was fine where it was. And then another time, this is years later, I went up to a cemetery. My wife loves to go look at cemeteries,
I do
especially
too.
in Colorado.
Yeah,
Yeah,
my
like
mom
up in
and
the
I like to do
mountains.
that too. Yeah, they're beautiful and
Yeah,
peaceful.
peaceful, and some of the tombstones are really
Yeah.
something. So I was up with my wife up in Idaho Springs, and she wanted to go look at the cemetery. So we were looking around. This is really old graves, going back to the mid 1800s. Who knows, maybe before that. But
Yeah, I live in Virginia, so
uh,
there are a lot of those out
oh,
here.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I came across an old gravesite. It was like there was 3 stones, and they were obviously all part of the same family, and they were so old that they were tilted and leaning and stuff. He started talking to me, and when I hear them, when I actually hear them with my ears, or it
Hmm.
feels like I'm hearing them with my ears, they sound real screechy, like a somebody's screeching on a violin at the very highest note. It's a squealy, screechy sound. So I don't really hear the words, but the concepts of what they're saying
Mm,
come to me.
right. Telepathically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
telepathically. So, but I do hear the screechy sounds. So it was talking to me. It showed me how it died. I was real curious, and I go, well, how did your life end? How did you end up? How did you end up here? I saw a vision of a woman with 2 little kids, and she was very sick. And she was in this old wood shack, wasn't decorated at all. It was just like a shed. And I could see light through some of the cracks in the wall in the wood. And she was sitting there against the wall, and she was very sick, and all 3 of them died. So I wonder if it wasn't like some sort of plague or something that came through, or maybe tuberculosis was a really bad thing back then. And those people were isolated
Right.
when they realized they weren't going to make it. They were usually isolated. So that's what it looked like. And that I had a pretty good conversation with that one, and I was trying to tell her that you really need to move on. You should go looking for that light. And it knew what I was talking about, but it was a woman, and she was like, I can't leave. I'm waiting for my brother. He has to know where I am. So he told me to wait here for him, and he'll never be able to find me if I don't stay. Well, if she died in the mid 1800s, he ain't coming.
He's already up
you
there
know,
on the other
he's
side.
yeah, he's done his thing. Maybe he made it.
Yeah.
So she believed that she had to wait. And so, what's really funny is you watch these ghost shows on TV where people are investigating the presence of ghosts and stuff. It's really too bad that they often portray that attitude that the presence of a ghost is a bad thing,
I know.
or like they're automatically evil and you got to really look out.
Yeah.
I've never really had that, not from a ghost that was like a person. No, I have been confronted by a demon. I believe it was a demon, and I had to fight it off. So there is evil out there that will attack people like me if I'm not careful.
Hmm.
And but usually when I just see a casual ghost someplace, there's nothing wrong with them. I do detect their confusion though, or if they're a little bit unsure of themselves, they don't know what to do.
Hmm.
They get stuck. That's all there is to it.
That's interesting.
So,
Thank you so much for
but
sharing that.
yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well, I know we've come
Actually,
to,
I
oh,
enjoy
go ahead.
talking about it.
Oh, I'm glad you
I
do.
enjoy
Yeah.
talking about it.
I
So,
know people
yeah.
find it really interesting. And I know I I don't have experience with I know some people don't believe that spirits get stuck, and then other people do have evidence from their own experiences that they do. I've heard that spirits are different from ghosts, that ghosts are just sort of like um remnants of memories in a sense, that are still, their energy still remains, but the actual spirit has moved on. Like the actual spirit has done its thing, but there's still sometimes traces of like old traumas or things that have relived. And I don't know how it all works. I know as a medium, all I know is I just receive information from the other side that's all about love and
Right.
healing and kindness. I
Right.
also ask for that and intend for that.
Oh,
And I
yeah.
don't, and I haven't actually seen, other than an orb, a spirit, spirits with my naked eye, which a lot of people don't, but a lot of people
Mhm.
who've had near death experiences are more tuned into that and will sometimes see that. So I love hearing everyone's experience, because all I can say for sure that I know is what I've experienced, which is I know that spirits
That's right.
communicate with me, not that same way, but through just telepathy by
Right.
my own thoughts. And the only reason that I personally know that the thoughts are coming from spirit is by having someone validate it. When I say, I'm hearing this, does that mean something? And the person says, yes, it does. And that's really the only difference between my thought and a spirit thought is
Yeah.
me testing it out by asking you, I'm having this thought. Can you
Hmm.
validate that this is a spirit thought? So I think it's
Hmm.
cool to hear about people who actually can see and hear those voices and know for sure. Sometimes I know for sure, but it's not very much different from my own thought. And these people are
Hmm.
coming to say hi or to send love or to say,
Oh.
I'm sorry. And it's all good and all light. I find that really interesting. I know I could talk about this for hours, but I know by now it's going on too long. So I just want to thank you so much for being here and sharing your,
Mm,
like I said, your truth. This is your story,
that's
and this
right.
is your experience. And so it means a lot for you to have been shown vulnerability and your experience with others. I think it's really helpful and it really means something.
Yeah, and perhaps I should tell, your listeners that me, myself, I truly hope that not everything that I saw in the future happens the way it did, because some of it was pretty ugly. And
Yeah.
I think really, if we all just focus on the love more and the forgiveness and the grace, why do we have to judge each other so harshly? Why don't we forgive and quit punishing each other? For what? It's like manipulating for what? So yeah, I really do want to be wrong. I don't want the future to play out the way I saw it, because it wasn't fun what I saw.
Yeah.
And
Except
maybe
for the
we can
very
redo
end of
some
it.
of that.
Yeah. And
Well,
it,
yeah, at
that
the very end, that was very beautiful. Yes.
Yeah, and thank you
Yes.
for sharing that message as well. That I think it is important to hear that it's going to be rough for a while, but please
Yep.
have heart that it's leading to something, and
It's
that
leading to some.
yeah, and that's we need to know that. I think we need to know that there is some sort of rhyme or reason to the terrible things that happen because it's so hard to
Yeah.
understand. So
Yeah.
thank you, Ken Lett, for being here. It has been such a pleasure. I look forward to being in touch with you and hearing more from you and seeing what happens. So we'll
Yeah.
keep yeah.
Anytime if you want to do another session, just let me
Yeah.
know.
I know there's so much more to talk about. So we'll have to
Yeah.
formulate some more. Thank you for your time. It was great having you.
Oh, you're welcome. And thank you for inviting me.
My